In the quiet moments before the world wakes up, there's a place where pain meets peace, where every breath feels like a prayer and grief stands still. We carry the weight of what was and search for meaning in the smallest things. And sometimes all it takes is one moment to remind us we're still here, still healing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch. I am the host of this podcast, and yes, we are your number one podcast for bringing stories around death, dying, and grief, all the messiness that comes in between with some amazing people out here changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. Now, before I bring on my next guest, I would like to say that this is a live stream, so if you have any questions or comments for either myself or my guests, please put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them as we go. One other thing, this is for educational purposes only. Now, without further ado, guys, help me welcome my next guest, my friend Lisa, to the show. Lisa, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
I am doing amazing. We are here. We're making it happen. You know, it's another beautiful day in the neighborhood, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So now, before we get started, Lisa, introduce yourself to the audience. Tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Sure. So my name is Lisa Rites. I live here in Delaware on the East Coast, United States. I have been a respiratory therapist for the last 42 years, and I have moved myself into a position of a peer-to-peer grief educator, and I now work mainly with all people that are going through grief, all kinds of grief. I've learned a lot about it. I've learned about it being with divorce and death, obviously, losing a job. There's so many different types of grief, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today. I'm looking forward to that. So right now I'm remarried. I live in Delaware. And that's about it for me.
Wow. Well, first and foremost, thank you for the work that you do. And so let's dive deeper into what does your work entail, right? When you're working with your clients, like what are some of the things that you help?
Sure.
Educate people on?
Sure. So I do work a lot with veterans, and I work a lot with divorce grief. I do other types of grief, but those are the two that I really focus on, having gone through a divorce myself and not realizing that all those stages of grief that you go through with a divorced person. So I do run weekly seminars, and we talk about different stages of grief every week. And I usually have the groups talk about things that they're going through, so other people can learn from that. If it's one-on-one sessions, which I do also do, I like to sit and listen and just hear their stories and try to help them through one day at a time, getting through whatever stage or whatever place that they're at in their place of grief.
Okay. Now, when you talk about the stages of grief, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know that we have a lot of people that have mixed opinions about, the stages of grief, and so part of the things that I do is that I educate people and say these were written for people with terminal illness. Now, they're great pillars. Now, this is just my opinion on it, because as you go through the phases of grief, you can add to those different phases to kind of customize your grief,
right?
To where it's yours, it's individual, right?
That's
so
for
what are your
sure.
thoughts on that? Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. I also agree, as far as stages, some people go through all of them. Some people go through them mixed up. Some people go through a couple and roll themselves back to the beginning again, depending, how they're doing. And like you said, I think different things come up through each stage where people just really have to think about what part they're in. For instance, if you're in the anger stage, which supposedly is the first stage of grief, usually that's the first thing that happens. But anger can also bring on guilt, and it can bring on other emotional feelings, I think, that aren't totally listed as a, stage of grief. So that's why I do like to work with people and find out where they're at and just try to help them through each particular day that they're going through.
Yeah. Now, which leads me to my next question. When trying to figure out where to put these things, because it can, like when we think about anger, right? Like anger can look a lot like the acceptance part too, right? Because we can come to a place of acceptance and anger, of just saying, "Hey, it is what it is," which that's one of my favorite phases.
Is it? I find that a difficult one to grasp. I'm not an "is what it is" person, but that's okay.
Yeah, well,
I
because
feel like it is what you make it. Because
yeah,
it is, and it is what you've made it be. So
this is true. This is true. But then, it's like a lot of people say that. They were like, "Why do you always say that?" It was like, because it is what it is. It's like I've come to accept it, come to a place of accepting the situation for what it is, right? Like
sure.
I'm open to whatever happens after this point. It's just like, okay, it is what it is. Like I don't. So although I may be upset, it's like.
I can't do anything about it, right? Is that what you're thinking? I'm at this place and I
have to accept it, or we have to keep moving, right?
Right.
That's part of the things that we do. Now let's talk about your journey a little bit more. What was the journey like leading up to where you are today?
So again, like I said, I've worked with, I've been a respiratory therapist, so I've dealt with a lot of death through the last 42 years. I've watched a lot of families, unfortunately, have to deal with death, and knowing that death was coming up the line. So having to deal with those families, watching them watch their loved ones go, watching people who have watched family members take a long time to pass. It just, at this point, I've gotten to where I want to be able to help those people now and sit with them and try to help them through that part, because I couldn't before. I could only do my part of the job, but now, I've transitioned to where I feel like I want to help people. As far as my divorce, that was one of the reasons I've also moved into where I am. And I just wrote a book. It's actually my personal story. And also it talks about the stages of grief going through a divorce. But I was able to come out on the other side of mine, and my ex-husband and I are still friends, and our families are still very close. I actually was at his wedding about a year ago. So I've been able to go through that acceptance stage and come to some realizations and take responsibility for part of what happened, which kind of helped me and led me into the place I am. So I'm trying to share my story about getting through a divorce and actually knowing that there is another side, that you can be at peace. And if you're not friendly with the person you've been with, that's okay. But I hope people can find some inner peace after they get through hearing my story. So that's kind of how I got where I am today.
Okay. Which leads me to my next question. When people are going through divorces, and I'm talking from a man's perspective of some of the men that I've talked to have gone through it. They're like, man, this was messy, this was just bad, etc. How do people become enemies so fast?
I believe it's I think it's from the anger and the realization that something has ended that you've taken a lot of time to create. Again, it would depend how long you were in the relationship. And this could just be a bad relationship also. It doesn't always have to be a divorce. There are open relationships where people have children and they're not married, but it ends badly. I think some of that, why it gets so bad so fast is because somebody obviously is extremely hurt. The other person probably not as much, because that's the person that's leaving. Be it the wife who's leaving or the husband who's leaving. Either one, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be more hurt than the other person. And I think now you hit that anger stage and that denial stage, and you can't believe this is happening to you. And there's embarrassment, and there is other things that go along with that I think that's what makes you so angry and just makes you hate or really dislike that other person so much. Because somebody is destroying what you've built.
Right.
And that's a really hard thing to have to understand. Personally, I think. So I do think that's why and believe me, we were not friendly in the beginning. So, I did go through a couple of years with that hate, that I also had, just like others. I was just able to get through it and move into a different spot. But yeah, I just think that it just goes downhill so fast because of that clash. And I think if people are able to get through that and maybe talk with others, or again, maybe use some support groups that are out there, find Facebook support groups, find local support groups, you're going to hear that other people are going through the same thing that you are. And I think sometimes that helps somebody come to more of a realization, and eventually things are going to get better and things are going to be okay.
Yeah. Now, which leads me to my next one, because I talk to when I am talking to these men, and so I see it from the other side as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's scars that come along with that, the trauma and things that come along with that, depending on the relationship. And you mentioned something very interesting, like it's becoming friends with the person after the fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does one do that, right? Because a lot of times we hear the horror stories, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And very seldom, like once in a while, I hear about someone like, like we just got divorced, it just wasn't working, or people often say, I outgrew this person, and things like that. What is the biggest commonality when it comes down to it?
I really think, as far as making that friend step, or staying close to the person, I really think that doesn't happen until you get past a few of those stages and start to get into that acceptance stage. Because until you can start to accept what's happened and start to find yourself again and be the person that you were, and realize and maybe take a little bit of responsibility and realize, you were probably part of whatever the situation was. And I usually will talk when we get to that part of the conversation. I usually will ask my clients, talk a little bit more about, what exactly happened, and, what part do you think you took in that? Because let's just say somebody had an affair. You obviously, something happened. There was a breakdown in that marriage. People usually don't just go off unless something at home is happening. So you have to go back and think about what things it might have been and try to accept that you might have been part of it. And once you can do that, I think that's when you can start to look at that person a little bit different. And I can't say I have men and women that both are the same, because I've had men whose wives have left them, and there's women whose men have left them. So, I really just try to, and again, if they feel like, nope, never going to be friends with the person, I can't forgive them ever for what they've done, that's fine. Then I need to help them find some inner peace and get past, because there is no sense in you being angry for the rest of your life. What good is that doing you? That person has moved on. They're happy. They're doing whatever they're doing. Maybe they're not even happy anymore, but they've moved on. So we need to help that person also move on. Find yourself again. Find things you used to like to do, and try and get yourself back out there, and that's kind of how I work with them. I just feel like, at least if you can find some inner peace and not be angry all the time, because it's just not worth waking up every day and being mad. Life is still out there, life is still out there. And, you and I, we both deal with a lot of grief and a lot of death. And, one day you might not even be here. So we're still here. Our feet are on the ground. We get up in the morning. Now you have to try to, get through your day and move on and realize there is still life out there for you. Yeah. And, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
That's very true. Which leads me to this question. Do you think that your years of being a respiratory nurse and watching people pass away help you accept the reality of, being able to tackle these things that are coming your way?
I do, and I've dealt with a lot of anticipatory death with my patients and their families because a lot of people had cancer or COPD or diseases that take a while. So I would see them in the hospital all the time, over and over and over again, dealing with the same families, becoming friends with those families. And I used to run some support groups for families that were going through that at home, trying to help those families deal with what was about to come. So yeah, I think it does help.
Nice.
Definitely.
Yeah. Now, do you think, and since COVID, do you think that access to support is more accessible than what is, because we live in a technical age, right? You can go online and you can find pretty much anything that you want, but part of some of the things that I do hear from people is that they can't find it, or they don't know where to look, and things like that. I go, why don't you type in this, and they type it in and something different will come up.
Right.
Do you think the age of technology made it a lot easier, a lot more difficult to find the support? Because we're in this field, and our goal is to reach as many people as we possibly can. But what if we're coming up short?
Right. And I do think we are still coming up short, because I think sometimes people don't know how to find us. But I do believe, due to Zoom, we're able to work with people all over the world now. Where before, you would run a local group, maybe go to your local church, and people could find help that way. But some people don't want to leave their homes, or some people don't want to be in front of people. And I think Zoom makes it easier, because they can stay behind the camera. They don't always have to put their cameras on, right? They could just, I like them to, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. But I think it's not that they're hiding, but they don't have to show their face. And I think people are a little more comfortable with that. They sit in their own homes. And I think it makes it easier that they're talking to people they don't know, and they're not local. They're not going to see them at the local grocery store. Like years ago, before we had this, you saw somebody at the library and you saw them at the grocery store, and you knew everybody in your town. And for that, people, don't want to be embarrassed and be like, oh, I saw that person doing that. We're here. I think you can do things from the comfort of your own home. And I think it makes it easier for a lot of people.
I love that. Now, what are some of the things that we need to watch out for when we're dealing with people who are facing divorce, right? Because just like anything, you can say the wrong things to people, right? And not even know that you're saying the wrong things. So when we're trying to hold space with these individuals,
right,
what sort of approach should we have in holding that space with them?
Well, I tend not to give too much outward advice. I like to listen to them, try and find out, like you said, hold space, listen to where they're coming from, listen to what kind of day they're having. And, if I see something where I think they're off, I will try to tell them maybe they need to seek help somewhere else. I'm not afraid to tell people that. I feel like if we're talking and, we're communicating and everything is going well, that's fine. But if I'm hearing something where it sounds a little scary, then I will ask them if they're talking to a different type of person, or maybe they need to seek a little bit different help, or, see a doctor or something like that. But I try to just hold space and listen, and, maybe give them some resources to use. We deal with a lot of journaling with my clients, getting them to write things out to try and release those feelings. And then usually the next week we'll talk about what was journaled. So, that's kind of my approach.
I love the fact that you brought up journaling, because that's a huge thing in it, right? You can write down when your triggers happen. You can write down, what you was listening to when these things happen. You have a paper trail for yourself to be able to come back and go to really identify those triggers, right?
Right.
And find a multitude of ways that is being triggered, and maybe removing some things from out of that path, so it's not so easily. It doesn't come up so easily. So now, when it comes down to mental health, right? And I read a study on this, like the mental health rate or damage that's done is skyrocketing from the last
Absolutely.
couple of years, right? You know,
And I
and
think post-COVID has a lot to do with that.
yeah, that's what I was thinking too, because you know, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because during COVID, there was a lot of things that came about, and I think those of us who had seen the writing on the wall, we were trying to warn people, like, dude, this is going to get really bad, and no one paid attention to us, right? No one paid attention to us then when we tried to tell them that we have a mental health epidemic, we have a domestic violence epidemic, because people only see the little things. They don't see what goes on behind doors, right? And I think what the beautiful thing about COVID was that when it happened, it brought all of these different things out, right? And it made people, it forced people to sit down and actually pay attention to what was going on. You know, what's your opinion? What's your thoughts and opinions on that?
I agree with you. I think a lot of people started to realize a lot of things that were happening. But I do personally, I do feel I saw a huge increase in mental health issues. There was a lot of depression going on from people having to stay in their homes. I think there was a lot of people were getting a lot of different information. I think people were very confused. People weren't allowed to see their loved ones. And I just think it skyrocketed and caused a lot of mental health issues, which I also think is a huge thing in this country that it's not taken care of. There needs to be definitely more support for mental health and people to realize that when they're having a crisis. I think a lot of people don't understand that. You know, along with grief, I think a lot of people don't understand grief and don't understand what happens in grief, and that grief can last a lifetime. You know, people are always told, and same thing with, I think, like mental, you're fine, you'll get over it, you're better, you know, you don't need to go see anybody, you know, oh, you're just having a bad day. But it's not. Some people just need to talk that out and try to get some support for whatever it is that they're feeling at the time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that didn't happen during COVID. Again, people were, you know, kind of stuck in their homes. They weren't seeing anybody. Nobody was talking to anybody,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. I was while you were talking about that, I started thinking about the grief, right? And the education that comes along with that to help people understand the multiple ways that you can grieve, because I think we overlook a lot of it, right? And I know just within the last few years, and I've met a lot of people who are dealing with divorces and things like that, you know, whether men or women, you know, and it's becoming more prominent. It's becoming like something big out there. When we talk about the education, what are your thoughts on adding divorce grief into the educational part? That way people are better equipped to understand that avenue of it, right? Yeah. What are your thoughts and opinions on that?
I guess I feel like over the past year or so, I feel like different types of grief are starting to come out, and people are starting to realize. I mean, obviously I do push divorce grief and let people understand about when you're going through a divorce, what you're going through. But for me, it was an aha moment when I was in school and I was, you know, getting certified. I didn't even realize that divorce was grief until I thought back and went through all my steps. And I was like, wow, I went through all of this and didn't even realize it was grief.
Right.
You know, but I'm always out there. I'm always spreading the word, trying to talk to people about grief and any kind of grief, that it really can be from loss of a job, could be loss of a home. I mean, these people in Texas that are losing their family and their children, you know, their homes, all of that, that's all going to be moments of grief that, you know, and devastation. And I think, again, even educating people on the grief aspect of a natural disaster. People don't realize that that's also grief, and you're going to be angry, right? That your house was washed away, and you know you're going to go through those stages, and at some point you're going to have to accept that this is what happened, and now I need to figure out what I'm going to do next. You know, but I feel like people don't realize that those are all stages of grief that you're going through, no matter what's happening. So I do think education is huge. I think, I'm so glad there's all of us out there and we're doing things like this to try and educate the public on, grief is not just, oh, my mom passed away, 2 weeks later, I'm good, or I came from an Italian family. When my grandmother passed, my mother wore black for a year. We couldn't put Christmas lights up because that was just what you did. There were traditions. But I feel like today people are just, you're back to work in 3 days. You get your 3 grief days and you're back to work and you're supposed to be normal. Right?
Yeah. Just as well as I do, it does not work that way.
It doesn't work that way, but society tells us it's supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not. It's, you're supposed to be allowed to have your time to break down and your time to learn about the grief process. So I'm glad there are coaches and educators and people like us out there that hopefully there'll be more of us trying to get this information out to people, because people really need to be educated on this process.
They really do. And I think we're starting to make a little bit of headway. More people are starting to come into the industry, and I'm loving the diversity that's in there, that's out there right now, to be able to reach more people, to help guide them, right? Because I don't think I've ever seen it this big before, right? You got institutes that's popping up all over the place. You got, support groups that are out there in every different facet that you can ever imagine. And then some new ones that are coming up too, right?
Right.
And the beautiful part about it is, Lisa, is that I'm watching a lot of the younger generation that is dealing with the societal grief that's going on right now. And I want to talk to you about that, because there's a lot of things going on in the world, right? We just had the whole incident over with Iran, and we've been having an incident over with Russia and Ukraine. We've been having an uptick in mass shootings, the racial disparities that's going on, the flooding, the tornadoes. I mean, all of these different things.
Right.
And the younger community is learning how to navigate this. What are some of the things that we're doing to help them navigate that as well, so they can reach the audience that we can't reach?
Well, again, I think being that the younger generations are definitely more technical and, tech savvy, I think they're looking for more information now on social media, on the computers, on Google, whatever they're using to search for information. I think as long as we just keep putting our information out there, I think they'll start to find it and reach out. It is definitely a different generation. And I think it's important that we reach out to them also, because I think, they need to be educated on it as well.
I want to talk about something.
Sure.
That I know it's been a huge talk or a huge question on people's minds. AI. Right? We're in the business of connecting with people, things like that. But we also live in the technical age where AI has become the artificial companion for individuals that are out there struggling right now. Is it a possibility that we can use AI as a tool to be able to help, or are you seeing a kind of leaning with individuals going to AI and having better relationships with them?
Right. Obviously, I'm older, so I hate to say older, but okay, yeah, I am not a younger person, so this AI, some of this AI really scares me as a person who's already educated and gone through the world, right? Some of this is very scary to me, because I've seen some things where you can take a person's picture and make it come to life and speak to you, and you put words in it, and it supposedly sounds like your relative that has passed. Kind of freaky to me. Like, I think, like, I don't know, is this the answer? Is this what the young people are going to be looking for, to recreate their loved ones and have them speak to them? I don't even know how healthy that will be. for people to do that. So I often wonder, but I have been researching actually in this past week or past 2 weeks. You can search like grief and AI, and there is all kinds of information that comes up, and there is AI guidance to help you through grief support. Personally, I just think talking to a human is a much better effect. I feel like you're going to have a conversation like you and I are having. You know, I'm going to say something, you might agree, you might not agree. We're going to talk back and forth and have a conversation. You know, we're obviously, even when texting gets crazy and kids are texting across the rooms, there's no emotion. There's no, you don't, you know, when you're talking to somebody, you can feel the emotion. Somebody can cry with you. Are they going to cry with an AI robot? And what is that robot going to answer back? You know, part of that scares me as to what can happen with all of AI and robots and all that, and education and all of that. Like I said, I've just started researching some AI and grief support, and it's starting to come up on the internet.
It really is.
It's out there. But you know, I'm still that old-fashioned person that I like talking to people.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at everything, right? Because these are the things that we have to take into consideration, especially moving forward. You know, how do we combine this? You know, and what are the challenges that are going to come up, and how do we navigate it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I put out a survey because I wanted to see what people thought, right? And we talk about those individuals who have gone through major loss or divorce. You know, let's just use divorce as a way of explaining it a little bit more. And one of the things that I have seen is that I've seen people who are deeply, deeply scarred, and they show no signs of coming back. That like that divorce just really rocked them, right? And they're just like, I'm better off on my own. And what they've done is that, you know, they've named their what are these things? The Geminis and the Chat GPTs and so many other platforms that are out there, these chatbots and things like that. And they can disguise the voices. They can even give them an AI face and things like that. And it made me start thinking about the guy who had a relationship with his AI. I mean, because we become dependent.
Right.
Now, for those individuals who have gone that far, is there a way that we can reach them? Or is it just going to be one of those things we got to see how it plays itself out?
I think we're going to see how it plays itself out. But my point, kind of like before too, is how far is going to be too far? You know, same thing. Like if you lose a pet, right? Are you going to regenerate that pet? Are you going to like bring that pet back and talk to that pet? Like, then do you ever get past the grief? Because if we can just bring back everything that's bad and make it all good again, how do we get past any emotions or any feelings? You know, and or you know, or is that just, it makes you happy? So okay, I'm just gonna pretend that my dog is back, and you know, I'm hanging out with him and he's barking, and I don't know. To me, that just, it does scare me that, you know, I don't know where that's going to end up, because it seems kind of like, it almost seems a little bit, I don't want to say creepy, because I'm sure there's people that are using it or doing it or whatever. But to me, it's just, it seems a little, I just don't know if they're ever going to heal or get past what they need to get past and move on and go to the next step. And do they want to? Will they ever want to move on?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, will they ever want to move on? I don't want to be stuck in a place, and you know, then the question is, the person has passed. If I can bring them back, so then they really never passed, and I can still talk to them. But that's not life. Life has things that happen. Life has tragedies. Life has death. Life has grief. You know, life has happiness. We go through our emotions. That's just part of life. But sometimes when you're making up all these fake things, how is that a part of life? I don't know. right? I mean, I don't know. How far is too far?
I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of this comment that just came in here. Let me see. They're just snitches. It's not grief. That's in the past. Move forward. Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And definitely not going to do that. But now, let's see. As we begin to expand out into the world, um, where do you see us heading to? Like this whole field of grief and trauma and mental health, what do you see in the next steps is in being able to reach so many more people and bringing awareness and bringing that support out there?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I feel like this is a new niche, and I mean, it's something that's been there, but I feel like it's just never been educated on. So I feel like we're in a new niche, and I think this is something great that we're going to be able to bring forward. And the more grief educators we have, I mean, there's just not enough of us out there. And I feel like the more of us that get educated and the more of us that can share this information, I really think is going to be a great thing. And the more we're out there, the more they'll be able to find us. I just feel like there's not a lot of us right now. So, and people don't know what we do. Again, I'm just constantly talking about it. And I think that's what it's going to take, is for all of us to just continue to talk about it and, let people know that it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to feel the way you do. And, just find somebody that you can talk to and somebody who will just listen to you. Because even if you're just talking to a friend, sometimes, to be like, well, you're grieving too long, or, oh, you need to get past this person. Or, I have a client that lost her friends because she would play cards with them after her husband passed. And they told her she was talking about him too much and she was grieving too long. And she actually lost her friends because of it. And she was like, well, no, I still want to grieve. And it's okay. We should be talking about the people who have passed. That's a great thing. You should be honoring them and always talking good things about them. Yeah. We shouldn't stop talking about them because they're not here anymore. No matter who it is, a son, a daughter, a father, a mother, a relative, a pet, you should talk about them. They were here. They were part of your life. You should be able to share that. And I think that's part of what we need to do as educators and coaches and counselors, is to just get out there and just keep educating the public on the grief process and get more people to want to talk and say out their feelings without just feeling like, okay, well, everybody told me I'm supposed to grieve for 3 days and that's it.
Yeah. Isn't it funny? Because I was doing a lot of research on cultural grievances, things like that, and how certain cultures are more accepting of the process of grief, and literally letting you be intentional in your grief. Then I've read on a bunch of religions where some of them will put you on a time frame and go, you only have this amount of time to do X, Y, and Z, and then you're supposed to be fine going on. And people just become very accepting of these things. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out, how. Right? Because
that's what they're told, and that's what their religion tells them. That's what their family tells them, their faith, society just tells them that. Look, I mean, again, I always go with this 3-day thing with a job, but seriously, you're out of work 3 days. And of the 3 days, you've probably just buried the person. You're not even yourself yet. And you have to come back to work and be 100%, right? Or you have to take your own vacation time or time off. I mean, I do think businesses need to be educated that maybe they can make more allowances. That might be a place to go also, and speak to like more HR type of people in business, because really they need to understand the grief process. It's not over in 3 days. It's very hard to just come back and be yourself in 3 days.
Yeah.
And expect somebody to be who they were 3 days before when they come back after they've just buried a loved one or whatever, So I think in that way, again, like you said, society and work, and everybody tells you this is what it's supposed to be and this is how it's supposed to end, but it's not. And we need to be out there trying to educate and, just like I said, just keep getting the word out and let people know that it's okay. You can grieve forever. It's just you're going to move through different pieces of the grief, you know.
You know, that's
You don't want to sit in anger for 5 years, you know, but talking to somebody can probably help you through that anger. And if you're still angry in 5 years, you probably haven't spoken to the right people, because you know, society's probably telling you stop grieving. So you're still angry because you haven't had anyone to talk to get that anger out.
That leads me to a very interesting question, because as you were saying that, I started thinking, like, what are some of the dumbest things that people have said to you during the process of your grief? And, you know, and what I mean by that, because we all hear, oh, you know, you should be over it by now, or, you know, when people don't really understand the depthness of that loss, they go, you know, like, why are you like this? And no one, unless you walk the path of grief, you'll never really truly understand what that road and what that feeling is like. And everybody's going to be different, but I think there has to be something that we can put into place and go, look, when a person is going through this, just because you don't understand, we need to have a lot more empathy with them, right? Because it's the same thing. Okay, here's one. We're going to put this one up here. It's the same thing as keeping people from being or going to where they're supposed to go through as they begin to navigate. I'm gonna put this up here real quick. Ashley Santiago, how long do you think is a normal range for someone to grieve? I understand it can always be painful. However, how do you know if someone is avoiding healing and using the grief as a crutch?
It's a great question.
Ooh, that is a great question.
That's a great question.
I'm gonna pop that back up here just so we have a reference.
So we can work on that one.
Yeah. I love that though.
Yeah. Because I don't think there is a normal range to grieve. Hi, Ashley. I don't think there is a normal range. I think it really is up to you, and until you move through all those cycles and move into that acceptance stage, I really think that you can grieve forever. And if it's the loss of a child, I know clients that have celebrated their birthdays every single year and move on, and you know, they'll I guess they're in grief, but they've accepted. But you know, they'll move on. They'll say, I have 4 children, 1 passed. You know, not I only have 3 left, or you know what I mean. Like, people will talk about that person almost in the present kind of tense. So I do think, as far as avoiding healing, personally, I just think they're not using grief as a crutch. I think avoiding healing, I think they need to speak to somebody and see what phase they're in, and see if, again, like I was saying before, if they're still angry, then I think there's still an issue, and you know, they need to get past that. You know, again, some people are going to grieve and it's going to be a week, and some people are going to grieve and it's going to be years. It really is going to be independent on the person.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, because a lot of this, and I totally agree. There's no normal range for grief. It's going to be a forever thing. Depending, you will get to a place to where, you know, it doesn't bother you as much. You know, where you're able to breathe a little bit. I'm speaking from experience when I say this, you know, and I have lost a child before, my son, and I just celebrated 9 years of his passing, which was the day after Father's Day. So, you know, it was a triple whammy. It was, Father's Day not only was it Father's Day, it was my mother's birthday, and my son passed away the day after. And so now I've had friends where I've lost them and I was able to move through it. Right. I was able to move through it. I was able to come to a place of acceptance and go, okay, this is just the way that it is. Now, did it affect me? Yes, but not as hard as it was when, let's say, I lost my younger brother. Right. And I think your grief will depend on said relationship that you have. Now, do I think that people will use grief as a crutch? I do. Right. But Now that gets pretty tricky as well. That definitely gets pretty tricky, because how do you determine if someone's using grief as a crutch?
Right.
Right.
I was going to say to you also, as far as using grief as a crutch, if you think that's what they're doing, then maybe they're still in grief.
Mm-hmm.
And and again, like I said, I don't know if it's a crutch, because they might really still be in grief.
Yeah.
And they could be in grief a long time. If they're telling you they're still grieving and you're thinking they're using it as a crutch, as an excuse or as whatever, they might really still be grieving.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me to another interesting question too. Well, another interesting thought, right? Because it's something that I started thinking about a few months ago. Another addiction that people really look past. Now, this can fall into line of using grief as a crutch. Grief addiction. You have someone who's totally enamored with the emotion, the attention that comes along with grief, that they would take on other people's grief in order to receive that attention, right? Now, when people do this, I will say, yes, that's when people will use it as a crutch, because that's the only time that you will be very empathetic to that individual without question, right? And they will go through life and they will just maneuver around it and things like that. And so you have to be, when a person is like that, just be really, really careful, okay? Because that can turn into an argument. And that's a good sign that when a person is using it as a crutch. There's a lot of arguments. There's a lot of, coming and jumping and butting in between what you have going on, for the simple fact of, they want to make it about them, etc. Right? So in situations like that, it can be used as a crutch. Any other questions that anybody have and everything, please just pop them on in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer. Now, I would have to say, because I'm reading some of them in here, just be respectful, okay? Because we do have people that are listening right now that are in active grieving. And so, I understand if you want to be a troll and things like that, but this is probably not the platform for that, okay? You know what I'm saying? We're not trying to do more damage. So yes, this is great information. Thank you. Thank you for that. So now, which leads me to the next thing. Let's talk about the relationship grief, right? When we are going through those breakups and heartbreaks and things like that, I've seen some mess that comes along with that. And I think, as human beings, it's like a rite of passage. You're going to go through it.
Sure.
Right? If you, it's just, I hate to say it this way, but it's the truth. It's just a part of life. It's the yin and yang. Unless you understand what great pain feels like, you'll never understand or be able to accept the joy of a good one, right? And why do you think that is? Why do you think we have to have that balance?
I think we need all kinds of balance in life. I mean, I think we need that balance to be able to get through the stages that we have to get through. I think just being angry and then trying to accept and having to go through the anger and having to talk out to people. I just think it's all part of the process, honestly. You have to have the balance. We have to have balance for everything. You have to have, I always say you have to hold grief in one hand and hold joy in the other, because you have to have a little bit of both.
I was telling someone, I was like, that's the only thing that is guaranteed in this world, except for that. If you're born in here, the main guarantee is that you're not going to get out of here alive. So you might as well enjoy life, right?
Right, exactly.
Right? Have the best human experience that you can possibly have. So you make some good memories, etc. Now, which you wrote a book. So what made you decide to write a book on it?
So honestly, my son-in-law has been after me for years, saying that I needed to tell my story because of the way it ended up, and that all of our family is so bonded together. Both our families are very blended. my new family, my new husband and his family, and, my family with my children, and then my ex-husband, and his wife. So there was just always something there. And I guess he just always, from the outside, just always looked at it like, you need to tell people about your life and how you guys are able to keep this together, because not a lot of people can do this. And, I think you need to share it. So I really thought he was crazy. And then again, after going through the whole grief education program and learning a lot more about the process and realizing I did go through all of that, not knowing I was going through it. And I wish at the time, and I do say this in the book, I wish at the time I did understand it more, because I probably would have sought out extra help that I feel like might have helped me. But I did want to share my story, and it is a rare situation. I agree that we are all bonded like this. I mean, sometimes my kids think we're absolutely nuts. I can tell you for instance, and this story is in my book, when my ex-husband called me to invite me to his wedding, I was like, oh, I said, that's nice, but I don't think it's the place for me. I said, and, I don't want to upset the kids. And he's like, well, I already asked the kids and they said it was fine. So I was like, all right, then, I was still a little awkward, and I spoke to my new husband and everything. He's like, no, let's go. It's going to be a great time. And you know what? We had a ball, and I got to see old friends, and friends were like, I'm so glad you're here, and family. And it really turned out to be a great day. It really was. And, as crazy as it sounds, but again, I am at peace, and my life has moved on. His life has moved on. Our kids have all moved on, and our kids are great. They have kids. We have grandkids together. That's never going to change. So what is the sense if you've gone through a breakup like this, and if you do have children, it's horrible if these children can't be together with the parents. We have to have every occasion has to be separate, because parents don't speak to each other. One of the parts of my book is to just try to understand the part of the acceptance and take some responsibility. Even if you're not the one who did the breakup, just try to think to what might have caused it and just move on from that. Become a better person. And for your children, try to keep it civil. There's still kids here that have to grow up, and, kids that have to be raised. And it's great to have two parents to raise those children, and not be in a fighting situation back and forth. It's just not doing anybody any good. So that was really the reason, was to just put my story out there. And also there, like in my book, there's questions and journaling. So it's kind of like a self-help book also, and goes through stages. So it's kind of a little bit of everything.
Nice. And we also have this comment up here. What technique or strategy has helped you the most throughout your journey?
So if that's to me, what technique has worked the most? I think really putting my kids first, and putting my selfishness behind me, becoming a little more selfless, and realizing that my children were really important, and what was going to be best for them moving forward. And that is kind of where I guided myself through. One of the biggest things, and I talk about this in the book too, was finding myself again. When you're in a relationship, you tend to become one, and you give up things you like, he gives up things he likes. But finding myself again was huge. Rediscovering myself, doing things that I used to do when, before I was married, and when I was single, and, music, and just reading, and just things that I like to do, I started doing again. And it makes you feel really good, and, kind of build yourself back up. And then just coming to the realization that, and I just had to keep telling myself this, that he has moved on, he has moved on, and I can't change that anymore. When my husband first left me, I was so angry. I swore he would never see my kids again. But that was silly. After I thought about it, that was just such a silly thing to think about, because he wasn't leaving my kids. He was leaving me. And I had to realize that he was leaving me. and we needed to work together and strategize together and be parents together to these children, and raise them the right way.
I love the fact that you brought that up, because I was on the receiving end of the person keeping my son away from me and having to fight my way back through there after that breakup. And it started, and it was a sad epidemic. And I see this all the time with men and both women, okay, where one parent will weaponize the kids to continually do damage to the other parent, talk bad about them, to the children, etc. I've seen it all happen. I've actually had it happen to me as well. And so what we don't realize that we're doing is that we're causing generational trauma with our children that eventually someone else is going to have to deal with, right? Because they're going to think that this is okay. And and they're going to go out into the world, and because this is something that's being taught to them, and they're going to find themselves in really, really precarious situations where they're going to go, well, this is the way that my parents did it. I thought this is the way it's supposed to be. And I think everybody acts that way until you meet somebody who's actually healthy.
Right. And the problem is a lot of people can't get past that part that you're talking about. So the angry person is like, well, you're not going to see this person, or I don't need your help. I can do this on my own. You know what? Why? See, to me, you're being selfish. Why do you want to do that on your own? He left. He needs to be a part of that situation. Give. I know. And it's really hard to say, well, you left. You don't deserve to have this part. But you know what? I don't want to do it by myself either. And that was part of what I had to think about. Like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, go with your dad. You need to be with your dad. I need time to myself. I need to find myself again. I need to, and it's a really hard thing. Honestly, I'm not saying this was an easy thing and to be able to do, but it's not like I'm some super special person. I just really try to work with my clients and try to get them past that. It's that anger part. It really is. You really have to get past that. Once you can get into the next few stages and the bargaining and the self-healing and the acceptance and, get past that part, your life will just be so much better and you'll be so much happier, and you had children together, it's not for you to take them and do and be angry. It's just not worth being angry all your life.
Right.
And that's one of the messages I'm really trying to get out there is not be angry.
I want to add to what you said, because I think when it comes down with the anger, there's this sense of it being personal, right? Because when a person hurts you that deeply, and they can go to the extent that most people can, we've seen the narcissists, we've seen the addictive personality individuals, we've seen so many different things, and the person on the receiving end, I think what the biggest challenge is that they can't see past what's been done, because you're encircled with, although this grief is showing up and it's trying to be helpful to you, it can look a lot like bad dreams, right? It can look a lot like anxiety. It look like depression, and so I think that's where the biggest problem across the board when we talk about all the grief that's combined, right? People have a tendency of saying, you know what, this is about me, right? You know what I'm saying? And not understanding that it's not personal, and that you can't control what the next person does. You can only control how you react or how you respond to those things. And so, and it goes back to what I said earlier. Once you begin to understand how to respond to said situation, you can begin to customize your grief to where it works to your benefit. Right. But I don't think people really actually see past that part. And, I think that's one of the things that we need to work on, and saying it's not personal. Right. You're not the only person that's going to experience it. You're not the last person that's going to experience it. But what we can do is that we can work with what you have right now by building some steps and helping you navigate this, but also helping you develop some grace
Right. And
Some-
where do you think you want
Right.
this to end? Like, how do you want this to look at the end?
Right,
Do
exactly.
you want to be angry your whole life? Then, then that's how you want to be. But there is other options. And that's
Yeah.
what I try to bring forward to my clients is there are other options.
Yeah.
And I know people go through custody and people go through issues. It is hard, but we still have to try to do what's best for everyone in the picture, even yourself, and for your self-help. You need to focus on and take care of yourself because you make yourself sick.
I already have a couple more questions for you, Lisa. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your amazing knowledge with us and sharing your story with us as well. And so now my next question would be, how can people find you?
So my website, lisawritesgrief.com. All my links to social media are there. I am on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You can, on my website, there's access to my book. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble. It's also, it's available on my website. And for anyone watching today, if you go to my website, there is a special price on the book that's being offered. I do have some freebies on my website that you can go to. You can sign up and get and download just some basic little books on grief, if it's something that might help you. And then obviously I'm available if anybody needs to reach out for a free consultation, or you think that you want to speak to somebody. I certainly can sit and do that with you.
Amazing, amazing. So now my next question would be, if Lisa had a superpower, what would it be?
To make everybody happy. I just want everybody to be happy. I really do. I am that type of person. I don't like conflict. I never did. I was the one who brought home the stray puppies. I just like to see everybody get along. And I don't like to see a lot of anger in the world. So my superpower would be to try and take away anger and have people just be happy.
I love that. And now, if you could leave the audience with something, what would you leave them with?
What I always say, it's okay to not be okay.
I love that. I love that. And with that being said, guys, Lisa's information is in the YouTube channel. And if this is your first time tuning in and you made it all the way to the end, do me a favor, head on over to the YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, so you'll be notified every time that we drop a new episode. But most importantly, maybe these conversations aren't for you just yet, but maybe you know someone who can benefit from the conversations that we have. Do me a favor, if you could just share this along with them. We're trying to reach more people out there. We're going to normalize the conversation around death, dying, and grief, and we're going to introduce you to some amazing people that can help you navigate yours. Okay. And with that being said, guys, thank you for tuning in. We're going to see you guys in the next one. You guys already know we do one every day. Lisa, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it.
Most definitely. I appreciate that. And we're going to catch you guys in the next one. And like I said, if you're not, be out there making memories with somebody, because tomorrow is not promised, right?
Absolutely.
And with that being said, I'm Tony Lynch. We're signing out. I love you.
Thank you.